Most Germanic kings didn't recruit warriors as they were limited on a social basis. Instead, warriors were incented to fight in exchange for prestige, wealth, or just a sense of duty. The Germanic warriors were known for having tough infantry, but were not known for having high quality metal. This was again reserved for the elites. Instead, the common infantry fighter wore linen or leather, and wore nothing above their waist. It was mainly the leaders who wore armour. This would have been simple chainmail, or on rare occasions, scale armour. Helmets were also limited in early Germanic armies, most likely so that the warrior could be more easily seen in battle, and maybe show off their fancy hair. Helmets did become more common over time, but these did not have horns like some suggest. Instead, they wielded javelins and short spears called fremia. As iron was hard to come by, these fremia were considerably lesser than their counterparts at the time. They also carried long oval, rectangular or circular wooden shields that had iron on them for greater bashing ability. Tribal symbols would have been painted on these shields, most likely their clan or possibly a family symbol. The bashing ability of the shield came from their shield bosses, which were often spiked to double as an offensive weapon. These Germanic warriors also utilised the shield wall, which may have been adopted from the Roman scutum. However, this could have developed independently. Even for the time, they were woefully equipped. However, Tacticus spoke boldly at their courage and brutal warfare. The Germanic people viewed cowardice as probably the worst of all traits, and bravery as the most virtuous. The heavy infantry would have utilised a variety of weapons passed down through the family and tribe. Most notably were axes, spears, javelins, slings, bows, axes, and even wooden and bone clubs. In fact, the Germans had very little metal, even as late as the 1st century. However, in later periods, all Germanic tribes seemed to love small circular shields that they would paint. This shield would have been given to them at the age of 16 by their king, a noble, or even their father. They would also utilise guerrilla tactics against their foes, mostly due to their inferior equipment and numbers. Their dark woodland home made ambushes a constant threat to any invader into German land. There are accounts of some tribes painting their weapons and bodies black with charcoal dye, aiding camouflage. The Hurai tribe, for example, used black shields and painted their bodies, and attacked at night as a shadowy army, much to the terror of their opponents. Theories have been proposed connecting the Hurai to the Inhiria, ghostly warriors in service to the god Odin. These were attested to much later by the North Germanic peoples by way of Norse mythology, and the tradition of the Wild Hunt, a procession of the dead through the winter night sky, sometimes led by Odin himself. Unlike other tribes around them, distinctly the Celts to their west, the early Germanic tribes made very little use of cavalry. Instead, horses were reserved as a symbol of power and luxury to the elite. As Romanization spread into Germania, however, the Germanic peoples would become very adept horsemen. In fact, before Romanization, Germanic infantry moved toe-to-toe with horses, suggesting they were pulled or just trotted them into battle. Maybe the Germans saw the horse as more of a status symbol, saw the height advantage of being on a horse being enough for battle, or just the concept of a cavalry charge had not occurred to them, as they were more of a skirmish and guerrilla tactic people. Freemen were trained to be warriors at a young age by their uncles and fathers, and by the age of 16 they were expected to do battle. Germans also viewed battle as a spectacle. Women and children would sometimes accompany the men to battle and cheer them on from the sidelines. Although this was not uncommon for other tribes and times, even the Celts, there were more references to the Germans doing this. The women and children normally travelled in wagons and egged their men on like cheerleaders. This would have been great for morale, but also made the consequences for losing dire. These men were quite literally fighting for not only their own lives, but the lives of their women and children who were close by. If a German army was failing, then the women would be forced to fight for their own lives. And you know what they say happens when a mother is forced to protect her children. These German women would rush into a losing battle bare-breasted, rallying their husbands and sons to keep fighting. The men were quite comically shamed into fighting when they didn't want to by their women. The women were also forced to pick up weapons and fight alongside the men on some occasions. Shield maidens were often mentioned in Germanic sagas and sometimes took upon mythical powers. However, shield maidens were not mythical and were just women who fought with shields. It's unknown how much truth there are in these stories, and we don't even know for sure if the shield maiden really existed. Although archaeological evidence has been found, it's unknown if these women were real shield maidens, or just buried with weapons as a symbolic gesture, or just buried alongside their warrior husbands. If shield maidens were real and women were expected to fight, this was unlike most other tribes and civilizations of the time. Warriors would sometimes wear animal skins into battle, mostly boars, bears and wolves. They believed these skins would grant them the strength of the animal in battle. It is speculated that the warriors would sometimes even roar, growl and snort in battle, taking on the mannerisms of the animal, possibly aided by drugs or just cultural delusion. The berserkers were a highly referenced type of warrior that certainly did exist, and they struck much fear into the Romans. They would rush into battle mad and sometimes naked apart from their animal skins, slashing like animals at anything around them. It's unknown how much drugs aided on this behaviour, however psychedelics were certainly used by the Germanic tribes for ritual purposes. The Romans often dismissed the Germans as being undisciplined in battle and acting more like a large mob. However, over time, the Romans would grow more respect for the wild and unbridled way the Germans fought, as this was the complete opposite way the Romans fought. The Romans would consider the Germanic tribes to be their greatest military opponents. This coming from Rome, the most powerful military civilization of all time, says a lot of how brutal and competent the Germanic warriors must have been. Swords were used much less and viewed as magical items, with many of them being covered in runic writing. They were also captured in battle and sacrificed to the gods, often by being broken in half and thrown into bogs. The Germans used the bones of their ancestors and of animals to melt into their swords, as they believed this would give the sword more magical power. And during and prior to the Iron Age, this was actually true. You see, bones contain carbon, and combining bones with iron was carbonizing it, creating a rudimentary form of steel. This steel was not good quality by today's standards. However, it was much better quality than the other iron swords of the time. Be sure to check out my other channel, History Sticks, for the complete, longer and comprehensive video.